Round one. Fight.
Have you ever wondered how playing a fighting game with someone across the country can feel nearly the same as if they were sitting right next to you? What if I told you that it's all built on a lie? A lie so convincing, you usually won't even notice the difference. Today we're going to take a quick look at Tekken 8 and how its player matching system actually works underneath all its flashy moves and crazy combos. So, fighting games have a very long and complicated history spanning over 40 years, and a big part of that history involves the different methods of how people actually play them together. Before the dawn of the 2000s, the only way to play against someone in a fighting game was to be on the same machine as them. The machine either being a home console like the Super Nintendo or the PS1, or on a cabinet at your local arcade. But with the dawn of the new era came the rise of the internet. And it wouldn't be long before fighting games started to utilize this new frontier as a way for people to virtually beat the crap out of each other. These first fighting games to adopt online matchmaking in the early 2000s had a big problem. They were really, really laggy, and the only way they could compensate for this was to delay a user's inputs to match their opponent's connection, resulting in very sluggish gameplay that didn't really feel good on either player's end. So this game you've been seeing in the background is Tekken 8. It's one of the most popular competitive fighting games in the world right now, and I think its implementation of peer-to-peer rollback netcode is one of the smoothest I've ever seen. And it also happens to be one I compete in myself, so I'm going to be using it as my example today. So to start, let's see what finding a match looks like in Tekken 8.
Get ready for the next battle.
It doesn't really look too complicated on our end, right? It only took about 15 seconds for the game to match me with someone else and establish a connection between us. But there's actually a lot going on under the surface that makes this possible. So Tekken 8 uses a whole spread of dedicated servers across the world to pair players together for online matches. These servers handle things like player rankings and region-based filtering and the connection quality of each player. But the match itself is not played on these servers. Instead, these dedicated servers exist to sort of broker a connection between the two players directly, and the whole match is played peer-to-peer with no middle server in between. This whole process is known as a P2P handshake, and it involves a few steps before the match will actually successfully go through. So the first part of the handshake is a technique known as UDP hole punching. Both clients send a UDP packet containing their own IP and port configurations to the dedicated server, which is then sent to the other player. This allows the players a direct path between each other's networks without having to worry about any sort of inbound data restrictions. The second part of the handshake is just a simple ping test. The clients will exchange a series of timed packets to measure the round-trip time in milliseconds, with 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second. A typical ping for two clients in the same region would be around 60 millisecond delay. If this delay is too high, the match will not be created successfully and both players will be returned to the queue. The third and last part of the handshake is to set a delay and rollback parameter for the match. So based on the measured ping, the game will automatically set how many frames of delay to use during the match and the size of the rollback window permitted during it. So to understand what rollback means, we first have to understand what sort of data the two clients send between each other during a game. So Tekken 8, like most other fighting games on the market, is designed to run at exactly 60 frames per second. Every action you do in the game takes a set amount of frames, and knowing and using this frame data to your advantage is one of the core principles of most fighting games. Every frame, your client and the opponent's client both send a packet containing the inputs that player is pressing during that frame, a frame sequence number, and an acknowledgement of the last received remote frame. These packets are each only a few bytes in size, meaning even people with incredibly slow bandwidth can compete as normal. But in a game where every frame matters, how can the gameplay be fluid and responsive with an average of 3 or 4 frames of latency? As I mentioned before, early online fighting games used a frame delay system. It would measure the latency between the two players and delay all of your inputs to match that latency. It wouldn't be until 2006 that a man by the name of Tony Cannon came up with a solution to this flawed system. He created a system that could predict the other player's most likely input completely on the client side, simulate what it thought they would do in real time, and correct it only if the received packet differs from the predicted result. And while Tony only developed this as part of an online matchmaking mod for Super Street Fighter 2, the technology would later be refined and implemented in basically every online fighting game going forward. That system is what is referred to today as Rollback Netcode. Fun fact, Tony was also the one who founded the Evolution Championship Series, or EVO, which is now the single biggest fighting game tournament in the world and happens every year in Las Vegas. Now, Tekken 8 specifically uses a combination of both rollback frames and delay frames. Depending on the results of the connection test, the game sets a base amount of delay frames, usually only 1 or 2, which is not really noticeable in any way. The rest of the buffer window is made up of those simulated frames, and if the game receives a packet that goes against its prediction, it will sort of bounce back to the last synchronized frame and re-simulate the remaining frames instantly. As this is also usually only a window of about 1 or 2 frames, it's not really perceptible to the human eye when these corrections happen, unless the latency is far above average. And the game plays out how you would expect it to, without having to wait for your opponent's packets to arrive. This technology, along with the development of in-depth ranking systems, has allowed online matchmaking to be a real option for competitive play, whereas in the past, online matchmaking was more so seen as a gimmick and not really taken seriously in the fighting game community. But that's really about all there is to know regarding rollback. It single-handedly allows the fighting games thousands of players know and love to be playable with people all over the world. And without it, it's likely that fighting games never would have broken into the mainstream the way that they have today. Thanks so much for your time, and have a great day.